No worries. Okay, so yeah, important to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today. If virtually, we are still meeting on stolen Aboriginal land. So it's important to recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, and wherever you're calling in from today, it is on the land of a people that was violently dispossessed and robbed of their connection to country, and you know, stolen away from families and disconnected from culture and continuity. So it's important that we recognize this legacy of colonialism and this ongoing structure that exists that keeps perpetuating that violence, and how it's tied into systems and institutions that we deal with today, like education, but also, you know, the economic system we live under. So capitalism as well is a driving force of colonialism. So it's important that we recognize. I'm calling in from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in so-called Redfern, which is also where the University of Sydney is. It'd be great to hear what other lands people are calling in from. If you want to drop that in the chat, where you're calling from, just so we can get a sense of the spread across the room. So again, great to have everyone here. It's going to be a pretty packed session. So there's a lot to fit in this one. We're talking about the idea of education for liberation. So this is one of the underpinning concepts, of course, of Rad Ed Week and what is now the Rad Ed series. So radical education, you know, to really go into this in depth, we want to talk about the university and the education system as it is. We want to talk about, you know, what ideas are out there for what it could be, and, you know, what the potential for education truly is in a revolutionary and liberatory sense. And we want to hear from you guys, from everyone, and discuss how we might be able to move forward and how we might be able to take action on this. So that's kind of how we've structured the session. We've got little bits of sort of presentation and also bits of discussion. We're going to go into breakout rooms, so get prepared to speak and contribute. It's going to be fairly, you know, relaxed and open. So if you don't understand anything or you want some clarification, please feel free to put things in the chat, raise your hand, interrupt, ask us to stop and explain, because that's really important. Obviously, we want to be educating in a good way. So please be active participants in this. So yeah, it's I think would be great to start off with a bit of a round robin. So we're going to go round to everyone and hear, you know, obviously introduce yourself a little bit, name, pronouns if you like, you know, what you're studying. But we also want to know what has characterized your university experience. So assuming that most people here are university students or have gone to university. So we want to know, like, what stands out, like what's been positive, what stands out as particularly good, but also what's been difficult, what stands out as the really difficult parts about, you know, the modern university system, the way that things are taught, curriculums, classes, etc. Like, what is the thing that sticks out in your mind when you think of university? This is what you think of. So it'd be great to hear from people. I will start with the other presenters. So we'll hear from Priya and Maddie first, and then I'll call people as I see them on the camera list. Priya?
Yeah, hey, so I'm Priya, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm, as James said, also going to be facilitating part of this. But there are a few things that have characterized my uni experience. One of them is just like a real frustration with anything bureaucratic related, like anytime I need to change subjects or like do any of that, it is just the biggest nightmare. And it feels like nothing is ever resolved and you just get like shuttled around to different areas and no one really knows what is going on because you don't get to talk to the actual people of your department or like related to your degree. You just talk to random other people. So that's one big thing. And another is just feeling like the classes I'm in are really big and like I don't really get to have a good community with the people I'm learning with. Like obviously there's community outside of actual classes, which has been really like enriching to my university experience. But yeah, within the classroom, it's a bit dire sometimes.
Awesome, thanks Priya. And also I just forgot to mention that we've allocated about 15 minutes for this section, so hopefully around 30 seconds each. So try and keep your responses to that about that time. Maddie.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Maddie, she, her pronouns. I think for me, the biggest thing is just the workload that we're expected to do. Like I'm always so excited at the beginning of every semester to, you know, really engage with like the course content of my subjects, but then with all the assessments and everything, it just becomes overwhelming and it means you can't really do other things. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Maddie. I've got Lily Campbell and then Alev on my screen.
Hey, cool. What has characterized my university experience? Well, the degree that I started doing no longer exists. So just like a long series of cuts and restructures that have made it very difficult to like finish the major that you begin in even. And then there being no information on that or way of kind of managing that. So just like never ending restructures, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. Alev, if you're there.
Hey, Alev, she, they. My favorite part of uni is like I'm doing one of my majors is environmental studies, and that's really like rewarding to study. And I really love organizing with everyone. I think that's been like I've learned so much more, I think, as well out of the classroom. In terms of biggest struggles, like I've just had a lot of personal stuff kind of go on since I began uni, and special cons and all those processes are really difficult to kind of go through, like always having to go back and like prove that like you're not doing well and having to get documentation and that kind of stuff is just like really shit. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've all had that experience. Yeah. DeAndre and then Jazz.
Hi, everyone. I'm DeAndre, pronouns he, him. The thing that probably characterizes my uni experience is I study law, and I thought it was going to be kind of an avenue for me to criticize our colonial legal systems, but it really is just like teaching us how to be a lawyer. So it really does feel like it's just a kind of a degree factory kind of thing. Yeah. So I regret doing it, but I'm in my fifth year now, so it's like too late.
Gotta stick it out. Thanks, DeAndre. Jazz, and then we'll go to Yasmin.
Yeah, I agree with Alev's point that I feel like I've learnt a lot more outside of the classroom than I have inside of the classroom in a lot of ways. But I think maybe on top of that, something that's probably followed my entire like way through academically is just like absolute confusion about what my degree requirements actually are. Because for my degree, it's changed every single year. So it's been extremely confusing to make sense of that, especially when the university like gutted all of the student help. So there's like not even someone I can actually speak to on the phone who knows what my degree requirements are. So that's not fun. But yeah, there have been some interesting thing.
Yeah, thanks, Jazz. Yasmin, and then Annie.
Hi, I'm Yasmin, and I actually transferred into the University of Sydney, and just trying to like work through like figuring out how to get credits to transfer and how it restructures the degree, and lots of like back and forth emails and being put through loops of people, and like having to just show up at an office one day and just standing there for half an hour trying to figure it out. Because I think education is like can be so enriching, but the bureaucracy involved in it can just be so frustrating if you don't have the time to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Annie and then Tim.
Yep. So I'm Annie. I use she, they pronouns. I would say my uni experience has been characterized by the fact that it feels like the uni experience itself is like really made with like one type of student in mind, which I don't think that I fit the category of, which is like kind of white affluent, at least in my cohort. So it's been a little bit of a process to figure out how to navigate that in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Tim, and then we'll go to Freya.
Hey, my name is Tim, he, him, and I'm not a current student. I graduated, I think, a few years ago, but I'd say my experience with it was very kind of individual. And I do remember kind of unintentionally using some of my open electives because they kind of changed the course, but I think it was like I went but in the version of the courses I was supposed to be, I wasn't supposed to do those units. And said, damn. But yeah.
So frustrating, such a mess around. Thanks, Tim. We've got Freya, and then we've got Luke and Tiger.
Hi, I'm Freya. I use she, her pronouns. And I think what's characterized my uni experience, I'm only a first year though, so this is like with not much time. It just seems a little bit luck of the draw, whether a course is going to be good depending on the lecturer and the course convener. Like, and I guess, and the size, which I think someone else said. I think some of my courses have been really enriching, particularly science ones where I have more practicals, and then some like statistics where it's really male dominated and there's just not that much support from the course. It can be a bit alienating and also like a bit tricky to have any engagement like beyond, yeah, being just an individual in that course.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really common experience. Yeah. Luke, and then Tiger.
Yeah, so I'm also first year. I'm doing law and politics, philosophy, economics at UNSW, and I think the obvious one is COVID. Like, I don't know uni, COVID, and all that online stuff, and so that's obviously been huge. But I think my major frustration, especially last term, was in my law classes. It's not even that the classes are teaching you how to be a lawyer; it's teaching you how to do an exam. And so it's like in a 2-hour seminar, like an hour and a half is just like, now you know the content, this is how you'd apply it in an exam, and it's every class that way. And it's just like no opportunity to ask normative questions about why. It's just, this is how you apply this, and it's kind of soul destroying.
Yeah, absolutely. Tiger, and then Mim.
Hey, I'm Tiger, he, him. Mine's been a really mixed bag. I've done some really great subjects, some really terrible ones, some that should have been really good that have been ruined by bad tutors. And I also feel like unless you kind of have the perfect run through, the system does absolutely nothing for you. I submitted the wrong document for an assignment almost 3 months ago now, in week 10 of last semester. And it still got me as an absent fail grade on the assessment, because they just haven't taken it to the chair yet, like 3 months later. So yeah.
Thanks, Tiger. Mim?
Hi, sorry, I missed everyone because I had Zoom troubles. But for me, I think what has characterized my experience is actually like the informal education that I've had throughout. I'm now in my 4th year, and just through engaging with different spaces, especially like going to do essays now, I'm like, oh, the stuff that I'm writing about is actually very much informed by the political discussions I've had outside of the class, which I find fun to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Mim, sorry. If I could hear from Neve and then Peter.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Neve. I use she, her pronouns. And the thing that's probably been the least positive in my uni experience is having a lot of really passionate and good tutors who have to go, like, their course content is great, but that's only because they've had to go above and beyond in terms of unpaid preparation time. And you can kind of feel their exhaustion through the screen a bit, I think. But a really positive experience I've had is first that there are those tutors who have the resources to be able to do that. And also one of my majors, the cohort is quite small, so everyone knows everyone. It's really easy and approachable to go to other people for help, and everyone's very welcoming. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. If we could hear from Peter, I'm not sure if you're there. All good, if not. There's a few people left with cameras off, so I'm not sure if people are listening in or, maybe away from the computer or something. But if anyone else wants to jump in and share, that would be great. Please have a go. I've got Sarah, Iggy, Carissa, Claire, Anna as well, and Shima. If anyone wants to jump in.
I can jump in. Yeah, I really relate to like how informal education, like outside the classroom, like shapes what you take away from like inside the classroom. And just like the last 2 years have all been online for me. And I felt like I was learning more going to protests than actually going to my classes. Also, like, just been really frustrated at like the amount of like interdisciplinary sort of project stuff that they're pushing for, which takes away space for electives, because I do English and I'd like to be able to like branch out more, but just having to do like useless employability units has been awful, I found. But I think the like really good like lecturers and tutors I've had have really made the experience good.
Yeah, 100% agree. Thanks, Claire. I saw Anna try to jump in before as well. Do you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, my camera's off. I'm like on my walk, but yeah, I think just hopping onto what other people have said about the degree factory, like thinking about how that means that like faculty societies like run events which are mainly career focused instead of like social, and how like heaps of people like aren't on campus anymore because they're working 3 days a week. I mean, of course, that's obviously due to financial like situations sometimes, but like it really just guts campus life as well as just making it more uneasily competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very competitive. So does anyone else want to jump in and introduce themselves or offer thoughts? I'll give everyone a minute.
Hello?
Parisa, yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. Parisa they them. I would say one of the main things that has categorized my uni experience, I'm doing a Bachelor of IT, is kind of how Western focused the modes of research and learning are, and also just the lack of accommodation for different disabilities within the structure of university is accommodating to those kind of different variations.
Yeah, absolutely. Both really important. Yeah. Is there anyone else who wanted to contribute before we move on to the first sort of session?
I can jump in.
Awesome. Thank you, Shima. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shima. I use she, her pronouns. I'm disappointed to see that universities are using the same teaching methods that they used to use 20 or 30 years ago. So there is little innovation in terms of teaching methods.
Yeah, absolutely. And teaching methods is definitely something we want to talk about as well. So I think it's a really key part of the education experience, obviously, you know, how things are taught. So thank you everyone for contributing. I assume people feel free to jump in the chat or if you would like to contribute later as well, if you haven't done so already, but we might move on to our sort of first section. So we wanted to really, I guess, you know, build on this discussion and talk about what this actually, you know, how we can better understand the university system through the lens, through a more formal lens. A lot of what, you know, everyone was talking about, I think, was really resonates with a lot of people's experience of university. I think, you know, we heard from people that, you know, it's individualistic. You know, there's lots of competition. People are, you know, kind of pitted against each other unnecessarily. There's and I guess isolation that comes from that, you know, in classes. There's the administrative elements, you know, you're sort of messing around with huge bureaucracy, and it seems like the university is functioning for a completely different reason other than to, you know, facilitate the ease of, you know, learning. At the same time, there's good and there's bad, you know, teaching. Sometimes it's a real mixed bag, you know, hearing that from people that you know, while you might get really great lecturers and tutors, there's just definitely no guarantee of a quality education in a lot of different courses. Also great to hear people talking about, you know, assessments and curriculum and what's actually in the curriculum and all of this kind of stuff. You know, how the university experience and the learning and the teaching is actually built. Because that is all really dependent on the systems and the things that are going on in and around the university. But it was also great to hear some positive things as well. You know, it was good to hear people talking about, you know, the other benefits to the university. Obviously, university isn't just the classroom. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in and around the classroom. And I think that's a lot of the stuff that we're really going to draw on to think about how we can make the university better and really achieve some drastic change. So what we wanted to talk about is this idea of the banking model of education. So I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Paulo Freire. I'm sure some of you have, maybe some of you haven't. Author of The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, an excellent book, and it's what we're drawing on for a lot of this session. Freire talks about this idea of the banking model of education as a way to understand what we currently experience, what most mainstream education is and how it functions. So a lot of what we're talking about in terms of like how curriculums are structured, just to sort of feed people through the system to generate, job-ready graduates. But even at a more basic level, how learning is geared towards assessment, and assessment is such a key part of the learning experience and how the whole curriculum is structured. This is kind of touching on the idea of the banking model in that, there is a real distinct hierarchy and distinction between the teacher and the student. And I think this is really the key idea. And I think it's something that helps us understand like what is going on, is that this model of learning is driven essentially by this idea that the teacher knows and the student does not know. The student exists in a state of ignorance and is participating in education to be filled with knowledge. So the teacher has this kind of, has their position justified by the fact that they can fill things in students to a better or worse extent. Freire, to pull out a quote from Freire, the teacher talks about reality as if it were motionless, static, compartmentalized, and predictable. His task is to fill the students with the contents of his narration. So this is really a confusing relationship. It's a relationship of students as receptacles and teachers as depositors, prescribers, and inadvertently domesticators. This is what leads to students becoming pliable and passive, and they interpret the world as something that's static. It's happened and it will continue to happen, and you learn things as static facts that that's how you interpret the world. So I guess to really kind of flesh this out, I just wanted to hear from like a couple of people, maybe if someone wants to put their hand up, what is the narrative about why we come to uni and why we do education? I think there's a kind of maybe a couple of different like overarching narratives about why people do university. What are people's thoughts? What's sort of the arc, I guess? Why did you come to uni?
I can say something. I come from an immigrant household, and so the model of education that's very much like ingrained into us is that it's a privilege, and so it's something that will afford us security for the future, and it's very much like something that we should take advantage of if we have it, and so it's very much ingrained with like employment and like life and job stability, that kind of vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty common narrative. Yeah. Freya, I saw you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Jazz and Sarah quickly, and then I'm going to jump back in.
Hi. Yeah. I've come from a slightly different background. I was at a private school on a scholarship, and it was very much like, it doesn't matter, what your interests are. If you're high achieving in the humanities, then you go through to law. If you're high achieving in maths or science, you go through to be a doctor. And I think that is like particularly pervasive it was a very wealthy community, and like they often had quite like high achieving parents. So I think it was just this expected thing, and achievement in like other fields like art or activism or things that aren't academia were like not regarded as successful. So that was just like the expected route to go to university and have higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Freya. And I'll just quickly hear from Jazz and Sarah and maybe Luke if we have time. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at university, it was like both a bit of an expectation because I'd performed well-ish in school, but also coming from like a working class background, I had nothing to fall back on. So I didn't consider any degree that wasn't vocational, that wasn't going to directly lead to a very specific job.
So I think for my experience, it was both like curiosity and want for education, but also like a very practical, this will get me a job that will pay me more money than like the other people in my community. Yeah, which is kind of the blunt reality of that situation.
No, absolutely. It is blunt sometimes. Yeah. Sarah and then Luke, and then I'm going to hand over to Priya.
Yeah, it was that sort of expectation, immigrant family, everyone having, at least an undergraduate degree, if not more. But now I'm disabled, so I might never actually be able to work. And if I do, it'll be some sort of extremely part-time position. So now, given the freedom of that, very unlikely having to ever pay back HECS and things like that, I have, doing education for things that I'm passionate about. And that's been, such a privilege and such a freedom. And it's been incredibly fun to just take courses that I'm interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And Luke in the chat as well, in sort of more privileged circles, university is seen as almost like a life stage. It's just what you do in your 20s. And I think that's a really good comment. So yeah, I think there's sort of two broad narratives there, right? There's this idea of university as something to get a job, get a qualification, it's vocational training, it's like what you do to get out there and get a better life, right? And there's that other narrative of, learning is actually learning for learning's sake. And, what Sarah's talking about, being able to study what you're interested in, and what Luke's talking about in the sense of just sort of doing university as an experience, and I guess a broader experience as well as the direct practical learning of the classroom. So I'm going to hand over to Priya, and Priya's going to talk a bit about these different ideas, and in particular what Priya talks about in terms of humanization as being a key goal of education. So thanks, Priya.
Yes, thank you, James. So the banking model of education that James has just described, this is what Freya said, this reproduces the oppressed-oppressor relationship. But this isn't all that we can hope for in our education. Radical and disruptive and revolutionary education can have a completely different goal. This goal is something that Freya calls humanization, which is achieved through the development of conscientization, which I'm now going to call critical consciousness because I had to practice that many times and I can't say it again. So Freya doesn't consider education to be something that some people just choose to embark upon. His work is underpinned by this philosophy that all humans have a continuous need to search and try and learn. And this paints education as this fundamental part of what it means to be human, with the end goal of humanization, or the process of becoming more fully human and free. So the opposite of humanization is dehumanization. And this is what the banking model of education involves for both the teacher and the student. It reinforces knowledge and power hierarchies. It doesn't engage students as equals, and reproduces the top-down dynamics of an oppressive society. So instead of this, Freire props up this idea of critical consciousness, which is learning to perceive social, economical, and other contradictions in the world around you, and then taking these findings and taking action to change this world. The critical thing about this is that it's emancipatory. It can't be imparted from one person to another in a unidirectional way, as is in the banking model. Instead, it needs to first involve the dissolution of the student and teacher dynamic. And then it must be a democratic effort between individuals who are open to learning from each other and who have respect and solidarity amongst them. So Bell Hooks, a really influential American activist and professor, took these ideas into her own classroom, and she gives us a really good example of using such a pedagogy. So she writes about the importance of creating community in her classroom, of making sure that her students were engaged with each other as people, with practices like making everyone in a class of up to 100 people write a personal reflection and then share it with everyone else. So not only did these kinds of practices allow the direction of learning to really be shaped by students' personal experience and views, rather than from a predetermined syllabus, but it also created a culture of closeness where students from very different backgrounds came to trust and respect each other and were thereby more fully able to engage in all aspects of the class. So back to Freire. Freire suggested an alternative to the banking model through which this critical consciousness could be developed. And he called this revolutionary alternative the problem-posing model, which is a practical application of these ideas. So now James is going to tell us a bit more about the problem-posing model.
Yeah, thanks. That was an excellent summary. I think the idea of the problem-posing model, is essentially that we're going to reject this tradition and this structure and these hierarchies of, you know, this what Freya calls the banking model, but what we would normally just call mainstream education. You know, we would reject that, and the way to work through that is to propose something new and something different. You know, a counter narrative to what education can be and what it should be and how we think it should look. This is, you know, based on a couple of really key assumptions and really key conditions. So it's firstly is the idea that authentic liberation, so this process of humanization, is not another deposit to be made in people. Liberation is a praxis. It is the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to change, to transform it. So those are the words of Freya. So this idea of action and reflection in combination. So you're engaging with the world, you're understanding it as something dynamic, something fluid to be interpreted through the lens perhaps of, you know, a teacher or someone with more experience, but in collaboration and in solidarity with each other. And so that's the second idea, this breaking down of the teacher-student relationship, you know, actually moving towards a system where we work in solidarity with each other towards our mutual betterment of our understanding of the world and you know, an understanding of our world in order to change it. I think that's another really, really key point, is that we're not just understanding the world for its own sake. You know, we're not just understanding the world because it's nice. We want to understand our world and our places in it because we want to change it. And this is that process of humanization, is that actually we are doing this to further our, you know, to create liberty, right? We want to liberate ourselves from oppressive structures. So as university students, we're pretty uniquely placed to challenge these current relationships, to challenge the banking model, to challenge these hierarchies of teacher and student. And a key part of that is understanding how learning and education happens in and outside of the classroom, and it happens in solidarity with each other. And I think it's really great to hear people already talking about, you know, how a lot of the learning that we really do is out in our actions, in our organizing, it's in our discussions with other students about what, you know, how the university system functions, but how the world works and how, you know, politics works. So I think, you know, we're sitting in a position where we actually have the chance to critically interpret the university, to what we do at university and the world around us, and then move towards, you know, a new system and a new model and challenge these established structures. So to do that, we're actually going to just, I think, start having these discussions. We really want to like make this very, you know, engaging and practical and proactive, use that idea of praxis. So we are going to break out into different rooms. We'll split up into 3 separate rooms, and we're going to chat about 3 of the key sort of functions of the modern university and of like the normal education system. So one of those is assessments. Another is the sort of curriculum and the primary learning method that we engage in. And another is this idea of collaborative learning. Like, what is it? What does it mean?
The university is like put into place like sort of like tokenistic interdisciplinary study, which doesn't actually account for like how the sciences intersect with culture and politics. And then when we were like discussing like what we would change, one of the primary things that came up was student involvement in decision making, in the curriculum, stronger democracy, and SCA was brought as an example of this, like students on the committees deciding the curriculum. And we also discussed in terms of what an ideal curriculum or like learning experience, like more organic learning emerges in response to core questions rather than like following a set structure, and also discussed like how the curriculum's like Eurocentric and is like doesn't like emerge out of like current problems people are facing, but is like sort of more established. And other like ideas about like an ideal curriculum were like being able to dip in and out as needs emerge. And this like would require like a free university. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, great. No, that's a great summary, I think. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. Is there someone from group 2 who will be able to sort of give us a bit of reflection on what you guys were talking about?
That would be me. So in talking about collaborative learning, we kind of talked a bit about the systems in place that really prevented collaboration to really happen. One of these things being a lot of focus on fears around cheating and plagiarism, which kind of discourages talking about material outside of class or really having engaging discussions and sharing work. We talked about how having required units means that not all people actually want to be there, so they're less likely to really engage, which I'm sure we've all had like a group project where we're like, this person just doesn't want to be here, and that can just be so frustrating. Sorry, like skimming the bullet points, and also having assessments at the end, so you're not even focused on the work that you're doing together and the effort you're putting in, but more focused on your end product. And we were kind of talking about like ways in which we could shift it so that the work you're doing in university is intrinsically motivated, so all students are bought into the process of learning rather than just producing products to get a degree.
Amazing summary.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome, good stuff. Was there someone from group 3 who wanted to summarize?
Yeah, I can do it. So yeah, we talked about assessments as, you know, they're just about like ranking people really, and just about like individual ranking for you to get into a job or get into university. The problems that we looked at is just how, you know, you're punished if you don't meet the deadlines or if you don't do the exam, and just how it's all about, you know, standardization and one style of learning. Which really excludes, you know, so many people and excludes so many different types of intelligence and, you know, styles of learning and stuff like that. I'm sure we've all come across that before. And then we had a discussion about, you know, what's the alternative? Do we even need assessments? So yeah, like looking at, oh, you know, if you're a teacher, does it really matter if you can do like an assessment? Like it's more about if you can actually teach in the classroom. And yeah, just it would be better if it was more like group learning and group assessments and not so individual and competitive.
Yeah, awesome. I think that really covers it. And to be honest, like all of these different topics, they're a little bit of an artificial distinction as well, because obviously these kind of blur together. When we're talking about assessments, we're talking about group learning as well. We're talking about how we interact with other students. We're talking about that competition. We're talking about, you know, how we interact with the classroom. When we're talking about assessments, we're talking about the curriculum. We're talking about how the curriculum is oriented towards an assessment, right? We're talking about how everything is built up around that idea. And when we're talking about the curriculum, also, you know, obviously that's engaging with who is in the classroom, right? How does that actually work? Who teaches the curriculum and who has a say in it? So it's really great to see, you know, all this discussion. I think this is really fascinating, and to be honest, is going to help us build the campaign for a better education, because I think these are all really excellent practical ideas about how we would make the university system better. To really flesh that out and to really drill down on what these campaigns look like, how we might push for this kind of stuff, because of course, we're not just here to talk. A key part of education is action, as we've been talking about. So Maddie is going to run us through a bit of a crash course in where the education campaign is at the moment, and also how people might be able to get involved. So yeah, thank you, Maddie.
Yeah, awesome. So as James mentioned, now that we have an idea of some of the changes and problems that our education system at the moment is facing, I think the next thing to discuss is how can we actually implement these changes? So one thing that we came across in our group is, you know, can we implement these changes by reforms, or do we have to wait for, you know, complete systematic change, getting rid of capitalism, getting rid of the material conditions that we live in that, you know, create the education system that we deal with today? So I think in, you know, trying to answer this question, I think that through collective action such as strikes and protests, we can win really, really incredible and radical reforms. But ultimately, without getting rid of the entire economic system of capitalism, those reforms will only be temporary. However, through those struggles, the people who've, oh my God, can you guys hear that singing in the background? Anyway, my family always decides to be super loud as soon as it's my turn to speak. Anyway, the people who've actually participated in these struggles do learn, invaluable lifelong lessons. And I think that we too, when we look back on the history of some of these struggles, can learn lessons from them that we can take in our organizing in the day-to-day. So to explain that, I've got a little example about a cool strike that happened at Sydney Uni in 1974, which was the strike that won a second philosophy department. So as I'm sure most of you are aware of, in the 1970s, Sydney Uni was taken over by radical students and lots of student movements. You probably heard of the anti-Vietnam War movement against conscription, all these sorts of things. There was also the women's liberation movement at the time that was fighting for women's courses to be implemented because the curriculum at the time was very, rich, old, white man vibes. So students decided to change that, and they tried to implement a course called Women in Philosophy. Not very surprisingly, the university didn't allow this to happen, but students didn't let it go. They organised a massive general meeting of 200 students who all voted overwhelmingly to support the strike. And you can see a photo of that meeting on this slide, which is pretty cool. So for the next month, staff and students went on strike. For the lecturers that didn't go on strike, students picketed their classes. Jack Mundy, who's also pictured here, who's the secretary of the Builders Labourers Federation, he called a strike on any construction that was going on in the uni until they let in and accepted this course. And other unions pledged their support until finally, not only did Sydney Uni accept the one course, they actually split the philosophy department into two. So one was now completely under the control of students and staff. So it was really democratic. There were hour-long, massive debates about what the course should actually be taught, what the syllabus should be. They decided to get rid of exams and assessments altogether. They also opened it up to ordinary people, so you didn't have to be enrolled in the university. And they tried to implement, all these sort of stuff we've been talking today about, problem solving model. Like they actually wanted to look at education as, how can we apply it to the world around us? And how can we change the structures that we live in? So that's a really cool example. Sadly, the Ed campaign today isn't quite at that level, but we've still been able to do a lot of really cool things through taking those lessons of collectivity, of struggling together with staff and students. So just in my short years of being an activist, I've been, proud to have done a lot of things and actually been able to stop some cuts and stop some things like that. Unfortunately, the state of education today, we're more sort of fighting against cuts to our departments, but yeah, I think that's still really important. So we were able to stop the Ramsey Center for Western Civilization back in 2018, which was going to be a course, for like the white elite men in society. Like we need any more of that. We also stopped the 12-week semester change last semester, which would have been like a step towards trimesters. And at the moment, we're fighting against cuts to the arts and slam departments. So yeah, that's kind of it from me. I think now I've got some questions to sort of bring it to you guys. Cool. Yeah, so first question, I'd love to hear from people if you're involved in any campaigns at the moment. Like what's your own experiences with organizing? Maybe put just like an asterisk in the chat.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
This is just going back to the question that you had up earlier, which was, can we, like, to what extent can we make the changes that we want to see now versus like, do we need to wait for a university and a general revolution? And I have an example of one of my classes from last semester. So it was like a science class. It had 2 streams, a standard and an advanced stream. And for the standard stream, our tutorials were just like, you break up into little groups and you talk about like a disease, basically, and you get asked questions, and then like as a group, you're meant to work out the answer. But the tutors for those individual groups were people from the advanced stream, and they didn't have like too much more preparation than us. They just like were given the worksheet with the answers on them, and they were told like, you just use this, like these are the answers, these are the questions, so you can do it. But it didn't work out for any of us because they didn't know really like much more than us. All of our lectures are the same. Or like we would ask the tutor something that wasn't just like one of the immediate questions that we were given, and they would respond with, oh, I haven't seen this week's lecture, so I don't know. Or like, I just can't remember, or no, like I've never heard of that, I haven't thought of that, like I just don't know. And so it was a really frustrating experience for everyone involved because we weren't being taught by people who really knew the subject, and they were having to like keep saying, yeah, I don't know, I can't answer your questions, because they weren't properly prepared. And all the while the university got like free labor out of them. Didn't have to pay many tutors because it was mostly just like people from the advanced stream. And so I think that's an example of how some of these ideas like, oh, collaborative learning, teaching, like learning through teaching and that kind of thing can be used, but like really corrupted in our current, like in the current system. And I think that we really do need like a complete change to actually allow what we want to happen, rather than like these really crummy, attempts at them.
Yeah, totally. I think that's such a good point. So many of us, I'm sure, have experienced group work at university, but because it's under the rest of the structure of university, it just becomes, terrible. No one wants to work together. It's still about assessing individuals. Yeah, if no one has like any experience, or if you don't want to talk about the campaigns you've been involved with, I think another important question is, why do we organize collectively as students? What's the benefit of organizing collectively? So yeah, just chuck a asterisk in the chat. Compared to like as an individual. Nate?
Yeah, I guess this is sort of on theme with what at least our room talked a fair bit about, in that at least at the moment there are those quite strong divides between disciplines. So you kind of want to be able to come up with a model that actually works or can be made to work for different people who are working on different things. So I think that's a big benefit of trying to pull in as many people as you can, so you can get something that can actually do what you want it to do. So, thanks.
Ooh, anyone else? What's the power of a protest? I know some. Oh yeah, DeAndre, go for it. Now take Felton.
Yeah, it's just like we have the power as students and staff, like their revenue is made up of our fees, and like it's our work, it's our research that give them those like corporate university rankings that give like that make them prestigious. And if we cause disruption within that system, as the people that make up that system, we can cause a lot of change.
Definitely. Kelton?
Hello. Sorry, I ducked out earlier, so if I've missed some context to something, or apologies. I was just going to say, I think universities are very much like they're state institutions. They're like run by, they get funding from the federal government, but they're enshrined in New South Wales law. Sydney Uni is, for instance, as like a public institution, but they function much more like businesses mixed in with like a sort of state-run business, maybe, because like the Senate is appointed, or a number of positions on the Senate are appointed by the government. The rest are either like usually self-appointed, and there's a handful of sort of make up the space ones by staff and students. But really they want to run like a business so they can continue to have large executive salaries, but also just continue to function, move up the rankings. It's sort of a game of competition between them and other universities, how they try and survive in the pit of tertiary competition. But I think that means that they run themselves quite like a business as well. So at Sydney University, we've seen like the last 5-10 years a really massive centralization of all administration. So like the F23 Michael Spence building, like the fact it was built as a special administration building kind of was the product of the constant shifts that have been happening. The fact they wanted to close all these sort of satellite campuses like SCA, threats at Cumberland, and they want to open up a massive Western Sydney campus that they're going to invest like $500 billion in, like with corporate sponsorship and stuff, which is their plan at the moment. Like the way that they're sort of moving is very much these handful of the senior management group run this university and everyone else has to function as a part of it. But I think that means why we organize collectively is because we need to have some sort of power to fight back. And I don't think they just want to listen to students, they just want to listen to staff members. It's actually about creating a crisis in the way that they function to be able to assert our power. And that can't happen as an individual. You can write the best worded statement to the dean about why there shouldn't be cuts in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences this year. You could write the best worded statement about cuts anywhere else or the profit margins or whatever that they're doing, but they're not going to take that on board. There needs to be some sort of pressure placed up against them where they're actually cracking due to the pressure. I think that massively actually comes from staff. I think students play a very important role, but we're really the product that they're creating. So we are like the next labor force that they're sort of tied into the logic of recreating the labor force. That's their role in society. But staff members, when staff go on strike, you can actually shut the university's functioning down. Student strikes can play a role in that as well. When students and staff unite, I think it's the strongest thing possible. But when staff refuse to do marking, refuse to do the work that will allow them to move into the next semester so they can re-enroll all these students, the university shuts down. I think that's the power that we want to be trying to assert as students, that we can work with staff to do that on good demands. We can start campaigns that initiate that. And so right now, one campaign I'm involved in, just to go back to the first question, is trying to build some sort of set of student opposition to the cuts in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and a $3.6 million cut this year called Future FAS, an arbitrary austerity measure that the dean's trying to put through that likely will cut theatre and performance studies and studies of religion departments as a whole. So creating some sort of opposition to that is not just like a really well-worded letter like, you're $135 million in surplus this year, why are you trying to get more surplus? That's fucked up. They aren't going to listen to that. They need to listen to pressure. So we need to create some sort of pressure.
Awesome. Luke?
Yeah, I think also in terms of like, why should students organize, or why and how should we do so? We have to recognize how kind of a unique and privileged position students are to organize, that unlike workers in a workplace where like the boss always has like, it's always in the boss's interest to stop people from organizing and to like shut down unions. Unis can't do that to the same extent to students, because student collectives, student unions, that's actually like a marketed part of the uni. That student life involves kind of political organizations and involves all of this stuff that we do for free, and the uni uses that. So it's not in the uni's interest to completely squash all kind of clubs and societies and such. And so we have this weird protection, and like a student union has this kind of weird contradictory nature where the uni can't get rid of it, but the uni also doesn't want us to be political. And so actually we have all these avenues that we can progressively politicize clubs and, art societies, law societies and whatnot, and organize within them as an institute kind of democratic control through these societies in ways that kind of other workplaces don't have. And so I think that's why kind of student organizing and student unionism has historically been so significant in many major changes, and why we have so much power. But also kind of to speak on the word collectively and how we organize, I think we have to like understand that we're not going to set up this perfect university model and be done and it's over. That even, after the revolution, after capitalism's destroyed, we don't have a perfect uni model that is static. Education will always be dynamic and changing. And so we actually need to like normalize practices of democratically questioning things and democratically making decisions. And that'll be kind of ideally all of human existence. And so like instigating those practices now in how we organize will then feed into how we organize in our workplaces and how we like run things in the future. And so I think that's why that sort of term collectively is so important.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for your responses. We're almost running to the end of this session, but I've got one last question, which is, why is it important that these ideals underpin our organizing? So even though we know we're not going to get a fully, democratized university and education system until we get rid of capitalism, like why is it important to have this ideal anyway? And I might just take like one or two people to answer this, if anyone wants to answer it.
I'm going to start talking. I think that one thing is that we can like make some wins just because we can't, like, I think that every struggle that we have and every win that we make is like, it's quite individual. We can't very easily spread that to all other areas, like with the women's studies department, that was a really, really fantastic win. And yet the ideals that underpin that, they didn't get like spread to the rest of the university. It's not like everything is like really easily transferable. Every win is like really hard fought. And so like we can't just be working at like chipping away in such small bits and hope to like win over the entire system. We really do need like everything to change. And that's the only way that like everything that we want, or like even some of what we want, will be achieved, because right now we just like get the crumbs that we fight for. But I also just wanted to say, yeah, like, what was I going to say? Something about students. Oh yes, so like we talk about a bit about like how students aren't maybe like as engaged as we could be, or like there's kind of a fracturing in the university, and that's because of a few reasons. But I think one important one to mention is that students have a lot of other things going on in our lives. Like a lot of students need to work and work a lot, and so that takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it doesn't allow students to like engage as fully as they would in their education, or really in like the social aspects around it, and doesn't allow them to like take the time to build community outside of just like the classes that they have to go to. But then also, Jesus, sorry, just chucked something. But then like also other things like caring for family and, a bunch of other things that students have to do with our lives, or that we just choose to do. And so like this current system, like the whole thing needs to change. We can't do this under capitalism, because we're always like, we have these competing things. We can't just like be students. We have to be students and workers and whatever else. That's all.
Cool. I think that's a good place to end it. We ultimately need to get rid of capitalism, but as I said before, we definitely can win, reforms still. And I think the only hope we have of winning those things is when we work together. Especially with staff as well. So I might hand it back to James to sum up.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie, and thanks everyone for contributing so well. It was great to be in the breakout rooms, have some really excellent discussion, and I'm really glad that there's been lots of engagement with this session, because we definitely wanted it to be active and involved, and we also want you to get active and involved. So if everyone is not already, please join the Education Action Group. All of the stuff we're talking about here is extremely relevant to what's going on in this campaign at the moment, as Maddie was talking about. And also come to the rest of the Rad Ed sessions. There's lots going on. It's going to be spread over the whole, semester basically this time. So there's plenty of chances to join in and to get involved. But I just think to wrap up, and we'll finish in a minute, no more. But I think just to wrap up, I think it's really, really important that we keep these ideas front of mind when we're talking about this. These ideas about education are not just about how we achieve liberation. They are liberatory in themselves, right? Education is power, and it's power in the sense that it creates and recreates structures that already exist, right? So it's power that's not necessarily always used to liberate, but we can use it, and we can use it to liberate, to subvert, to dismantle the class system, and to subvert and undercut the things that are negative about the university system at the moment. But it's important that we remember what kind of education that is. It has to be, there's a lot of effort to it. You know, it has to be engaged, it has to be collaborative, it has to be mutual, it has to be dynamic and transformative. And it's also important that we keep an eye out for where we're going. You know, we can't just sort of blindly stumble around and try and teach things here and there. We should be clear about where we're heading, and that's for the kind of radical, dramatic change that we want to see in society, that we need to see in society. And lastly, it should also be built by and for those people who want to learn and in collaboration with those who want to teach. So this whole process of putting together this session, but also the whole Rad Ed week has been a collaborative process with a bunch of university activists and students and some staff and other people in and around the university. So it's a huge democratic discursive project. So I think that's really the core of it, is that you can't hand someone liberation. They have to seize it for themselves, but we also have to do it together. You can't do it on your own. So I think that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this kind of stuff. And that's why it's really, really important that people should get involved. So please give those things a like and follow. Keep coming to Rad Ed, and thank you everyone so much for tuning in. Keep an eye out for, I'll drop a resource in the event that's kind of got some extra follow-up reading and things and like that, and materials that we use to put together the session. So keep an eye out for that if you would like to learn any more, and also feel free to reach out